Coming up on today's Locked On Bucks, Bucks add another body to their training camp roster. And Camille and I go back to Monday, revisit some of what we heard at other teams' media days, what was the most interesting, and of course, what is going to have the biggest impact on the Bucks this season. We get into that conversation next on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined as always by Camille Davis. We thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen each and every day. Free and available wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us on YouTube as well. All part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's Locked On Bucks is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So Camille, we touched on this a little bit the other day, but we've had media day league-wide on Monday, save for the Boston Celtics and the Denver Nuggets, who, of course, had theirs last week. But today, I think they're playing their first of the Abu Dhabi games. And, we heard some interesting things on Bucks Media Day. I was actually corresponding with someone I've referenced on the show before. I'll leave the name out of it, but heard their takeaways from Bucks Media Day and recaps. And not very high on the Bucks coming into this season. So we had a bit of a back and forth yesterday. Like, look, I think you're overlooking X, Y, and Z. And he said, good to know. And I didn't really take that into account, but good to hear from somebody that was there what the overall vibes were. Because as we mentioned, there's no attention on Milwaukee. Jamal Collier was the only national media member that was there, which is a far cry from what we've seen in recent years. And you get why. When you look around the league, you see what Philly did. You see the trade that wasn't official at the time of media day, but what the Knicks did. Celtics are defending champions. Even the storylines you can talk yourself into in Cleveland and Indy and in Orlando. But we learned some interesting things. So the smaller scale things that we learned and found out on kind of the first day of class with media day. One of those teams that's kind of what are they going to do? Could they make the leap into potentially a top 4 team? The Orlando Magic. The big takeaway from media day there, which I don't know that I love, was Jonathan Isaac put on quite a bit of mass and bulk, which I would presume means, hey, you're full-time center for us. I don't know that I love that. I think he was better as kind of the Swiss Army knife that you would put out there on the perimeter and elsewhere, because we've seen guys like Anthony Davis put on muscle, and it doesn't work out well. Speaking of muscle, I don't know if you saw the pictures, Camille, but did you see our boy Grayson Allen?
Grayson, 35 pounds of muscle he said he put on. I said, what has Doc been telling you this offseason about what your role going to be?
Grayson Allen just yoked now for the Phoenix Suns, all beefed up in time for this season. Not a whole lot interesting that came out of Knicks media day because of, the elephant in the room of the trade was not official until yesterday. But Philadelphia, there was some interesting things that came out there, not only in Philly, but on the other coast in Los Angeles as it pertains to a now 76er. We start with the Joel Embiid news. I think we referenced this the other day, down about 25 pounds. And that was the big hang up and question we had was, look, it's great. And Joel Embiid's a great offensive player, but it doesn't work, right? You got to get through a season, and part of that is being in shape if he is there. And with this weight loss and seemingly best shape of his life, what does that do to you when you think about the Bucks' chances against the Sixers this year?
Well, I mean, we've always had a healthy respect, I would say, for the 76ers, given Joel Embiid being there and everything like that. But all of the people who are talking about the Bucks and what the biggest concern for the Bucks is, it's like, oh, well, it's health, it's health, it's health. If you look at Philly, one could argue that that's also the biggest thing going on with Philly. We've talked about Joel Embiid and his health. We saw it in the playoffs last year when he came back. He still wasn't looking all the way quite right. So hearing that he came into this offseason thinking like, let me get my body right. Let me lose some weight. Hopefully that can help with keeping me on the court more often. And also hearing Joel Embiid just talk about like, I don't care about MVP. I don't care about All-Star. I don't care about All-NBA. I don't care about any of that. I just want to get to the playoffs and have a really good run there. And that, again, is another switch from what you've normally heard out of Philly. For a while there, was Embiid really feeling like he was slighted and not getting the individual accolades that he feels he deserves and when it comes to the MVP trophy. So hearing that shift for him, it's like, okay, well, let's see if this can help keep you on the court. Because, again, health is going to be paramount for Philly as well because Paul George also has a unlucky, unhealthy history dating back for the last few seasons as well.
So I know when we did our wins over under, however we wanted to frame it, draft, I was pretty high in Philly and said I expected them to finish with the best record in the Eastern Conference. Part of it was same old, same old. I assumed that it would be more of what we've seen from Joel Embiid recently, where it's a very regular season heavy performance and the numbers are up there and maybe he's an MVP discussion. And just the fact that when we'll get into this conversation with the Knicks a little bit yesterday, we touched on it. You talk about adding these new pieces, as we saw last year, how quickly they can assimilate depends on how much you're asking them to lift. Like Drew Holiday, you can't compare the Dame acquisition to Drew because Drew's an ultimate plug-and-play player. I think Paul George has a lot of those tendencies, and you still have Embiid and Maxey and that baked-in chemistry. So that was part of why I said I don't think all the changing pieces are going to matter all that much versus what we saw for the Bucks and what we may question with the Knicks. But this does make me question that, of thinking, I don't know if I'd pick Philly for the most wins in the Eastern Conference anymore. If they seemingly get it and say, yeah, the sweet spot, maybe it's 3-4. Let's just make sure the big guy's healthy. I would assume everything that you mentioned, he said, means he's not playing 65 games, that we could see a lot of teams around like 54 wins in the Eastern Conference.
It'll be interesting to see how that plays out too, because one thing about Philly is like I do still have some questions around the depth in Philly. So like if they are taking these games where it's like, okay, Embiid, it's your night off, whatever the case may be, I do wonder how, they hold up. So to your point about not feeling as confident about Philly finishing at the top of the East, definitely understand the why behind that as well. But Philly is one of those teams too, when I think about them and how they match up with the Bucks, where we're going to see it opening night because that is now just the new NBA tradition. Bucks 76ers opening night, you're going to see it. And
We'll
both
give it
teams,
to you there. You're just not getting in the playoffs.
probably not. Well, and here's the thing with the playoffs too. I think overall, if we're all assuming that the Celtics finish the East first or wherever the Celtics finish, I think that the goal whenever it comes to playoff seeding way down the line, you're trying to be on the other side of the bracket of wherever Boston is. Again, you're not dodging nobody. It's just ideally you're trying not to fight or play against Boston until you have to in the conference finals. You just want to try to make your way there, but it'll be interesting if Philly is taking this approach to the regular season where Embiid's not going to be in every game. What does that do for the standings? Like, is Philly going to be a team where it's like, we truly don't care? We don't care if we're on the same side of the bracket as Boston. We just want to get there healthy. And I do wonder if the Bucks go into it with that mindset as well. Although we heard Doc mention like, we want to dominate in the regular season as well, but let's see how that looks.
Some other interesting takeaways from Philly and what we've discussed here for their media day did not take place in Philadelphia. It actually came to us from the other coast in Los Angeles. So Camille and I will get into that conversation coming up next here on Locked On Bucks. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more. And you're doing it all on the same page where you place your bets. Best of all, you get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Doesn't even have to win. $200 in bonus bets for that first $5 bet when you use FanDuel. So to get started, it's simple. Head over to FanDuel.com. And we thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen of the day. For your second listen, we encourage you to check out the Locked On NBA podcast. Here's some more of the details about what Camille and I are getting into now. You can find that feed where you get Locked On Bucks. We put the link in the episode description as well. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So the other piece of, I don't want to call it news, but I think the other interesting thing we heard as it pertains to Philadelphia, Camille, is out in Los Angeles, where it was a lot of read between the lines. And I think the phrase that you hear oh so much of addition by subtraction, I believe that was even uttered out there by Norm Powell and some others in Los Angeles. So, of course, we're talking about Paul George, the big signing of the offseason. But if you go back to everything we heard from Norm Powell, from Kawhi Leonard, and a few others at Clippers Media Day, what was your takeaway? And did it make you re-examine, like, what are the Sixers getting here in Paul George? And, I mean, look, I'm not defending it, but why were the Clippers just so willing to wring their hands and say, okay, take him, we're fine?
I don't know. Maybe they didn't want to be on the podcast. Listen, when I think about the reactions that you were hearing out of LA around Paul George, I couldn't quite tell if it was they truly felt that way or if they felt kind of slighted that he left overall. And they were just kind of like the little saltiness of like, we don't need him. We're better off without you anyway, so on and so forth. Especially like once I heard James Harden say like, well, this season's going to be a lot of me. And the question comes like, okay, is Houston James Harden still in there? Or is this just, you know, how you feel about yourself, thinking that you can still go out there and be a system unto yourself? So it'll be interesting to see. But I honestly do feel like a lot of it was just them kind of being like, we don't like how this kind of played out. So we're better off without him anyways, more so than Paul George was like a cancer in the locker room or anything like that. What about you?
I didn't really know what to make. Like, we heard none of this. I guess I'm with you in what are they trying to sell and what's reality. The fact that we didn't hear really any of this, and we didn't even get a Paul George hit piece when he left of, oh, well, it really got rocky at this point on the calendar year. Like the type of things that you'll officially, or that you typically start to hear within hours of somebody bolting, that made me feel like this was just the individual players feeling a little let down and hurt that Paul George left. But the fact that it was multiple guys, the Norm Powell thing where he talked about, look, it's going to open up more shots for people like me. Like, I don't know if that's making the Clippers a better team. But I think my bigger takeaway there, I didn't really have anything in terms of, what's Philadelphia getting here? My bigger takeaway was you couple everything we heard there with some of what we heard from Kawhi Leonard too about his status. And, I feel good, but we're being cautious. It made me wonder if the Clippers kind of knew, I don't think this is ever going to work with Kawhi, that like where the knee is at. I don't know if it makes sense for us to pay Paul George. If that's the boat we're in, like we need both of these guys to be very good. We don't think Kawhi's going to be at that level. So I don't think it makes much sense for us to keep that asset.
That could be it. I mean, it sounds like from what Kawhi was mentioning about his knee, that's going to be a consistent. Just never gonna, like it's always going to be a thing that he is going to have to manage. So
which I think at this point, no doubt.
Yeah. Like his workload is going to be not what we thought that it could be. I think people thought that the injury is going to be behind Kawhi, but sounds like it's chronic for him. So it's going to be a thing about managing him, which is, I don't want to say becoming a theme, but it's something that you're hearing about a few players. I mean, we think about it here in Milwaukee and Chris Middleton and all the conversations about we're trying to keep Chris healthy. You heard it coming out of training camp so far, where I think yesterday Doc even mentioned like Chris snuck into some of the live drills, not the live action, but he was like he snuck into a few. But he's good. We're just trying to pace him. Think about what we talked about with Philly and Embiid saying like we just want to make sure we get to the postseason with me healthy. And I think you're going to be seeing. You saw it already with the player management and the injury management with the Spurs and trying to rest players and so on and so forth. But as you see guys continue to get older and they have these injuries that are nagging or they're going to be chronic for them, I think we're going to start just seeing teams just becoming cool with like, listen, if we only get you for 60 games this season, so be it. Because all in all, what we really want to do is have you come playoff time. So if we can get you through this 82 game grind and then you're good for the next 16, like we're good for that.
The other things I think worth touching on and noting here. So I don't know if we want to start to stir things now, but Miami with Jimmy Butler missing most of media day and arriving later in the afternoon. You noted no different hairstyle for Jimmy Butler this year. But I think when you take a step back and examine the whole thing is where I started to raise an eyebrow that you saw the news of, well, Jimmy Butler is having travel issues, so he's going to arrive later, and thought, oh, okay. But then you realize, like, wait a minute. You typically will start to arrive in your market a couple days in advance of media day. It's not like you're arriving that day, which Jimmy Butler was doing, and seeing, oh, he was in Paris with Jimmy Goldstein, who we've seen at a few Bucks games on the sidelines, and really delayed the return back to Miami until the morning of. And you can't help but wonder how much of this is kind of, we're getting back to the contract dispute and Jimmy Butler not getting one. So I think that's something to monitor. Indiana, I think there were some interesting takeaways there as well, because Benedict Mathurin is fully healthy. The Bucks did not see him in that series last year. He was arguably the best bench player for the Pacers last season, and now he said he's fully healthy and ready to go for training camp. That's going to be something to keep an eye on. The shoulder injury that shut down his season last year, and apparently he's been good to go for about 2 months now. James Wiseman, they added into the mix. He's not going to be ready. And speaking of their bigs, we talked about the Jimmy Butler contract. I don't know if dispute is the way to put it, but situation to monitor. That's the under the radar thing from Pacers media day, because there's a lot of positive with Benedict Mathurin back, Jarris Walker, their rookie from a year ago, that we heard Pascal Siakam have some very high praise for, and kind of like what we've heard with Andre and a few of the Bucks guys, Chris Livingston too, of they've put in the work and they're ready to take that leap. But then you have Miles Turner, who's due for a contract extension, and reading the room, he ain't getting it. So it does feel like this is the end of the road for Miles Turner in Indiana, and what that could potentially mean throughout the season. Is that a trade piece? Is that something that bubbles up and something that affects the chemistry of the team? So that's one of the smaller, let's file this away and keep an eye on it things.
Yeah, it definitely is. And to go back to the Miami piece of it, we've had conversations about how the Bucks kind of feel like they've been overlooked a bit, where it's like, okay, like we heard Chris Middleton say, like, no Christmas. Like, yeah, I noticed that. Don't like that. But that's all right. And you've heard that tone even through the off season of like, okay, Bobby Portis, I love being slept on. Like, let's keep it going. So they do have that. And Miami has dialed that up even more. Like, that was a reoccurring theme throughout their media day. I believe it was Jaime who was just like, we only have 7 national television games this year. How in the world do we only have 7? But it's okay. We're going to come out and prove that, the Miami Heat are who we are, so on and so forth. You have the Jimmy Butler aspect of it, where he can media day just saying like, no games. I'm ready to get to work. And this comes on the heels of, Pat Riley saying like, hey, I don't want to hear you, Jimmy Butler, if you're talking about if I was on the court, we would have beat the Celtics. Like, you weren't playing. Like, shut up and hoop. Like, I don't want to hear any of that. And then you have all the contract stuff. Butler gets to media day and he is no golf look, no fake locks. He is just him. He's like, I'm ready to work. let's get to it. So Miami's one of those teams too, where I'm really going to be interested to see how the regular season goes for them. Because I mentioned before, I really don't know what to make of Miami. Tyler Hero said he's healthy. He's ready to go in whatever role that they have for him. So Miami's one of those teams where it's like I've been having a struggle of placing them in the East. So I'm going to be paying really close attention to how they approach the regular season as well and how they look.
Yeah, and the Pacers using that motivation as well, as Tyrese Halliburton said that they feel slighted despite reaching the conference finals from a year ago. And that's one of the subplots from this season is, are the Pacers a team that's on the rise, or are they the next 2021 Atlanta Hawks? I think you can point to sides for both, right?
Yeah.
That first full camp, everything we pointed to for optimism with the Bucks, first full camp with Pascal Siakam and growth from the young guys as well. There is one change for the Bucks, one new name that has joined the fold. We see some of it mentioned in the comments already, and you may wonder, weren't they linked to this guy at one point? Yes, they were. So we'll get into that news and wrap things up next here on Locked On Bucks. That change, Camille, Terrence Davis signed to an Exhibit 10 deal. So look, the Bucks roster is set. Terrence Davis could have the greatest camp of his life. He's not making the 15-man for the Bucks. So this is more we were interested. We kicked the tires on this, like January of this year, that they worked him out. And he'd recovered from his season-ending injury. Okay, let's see what he looks like in camp and the preseason. And if we like what we see, I would assume Terrence Davis is going to be a member of the Wisconsin Herd next season.
Yeah, that was my thought too. As soon as I saw, you see Exhibit 10, so it's like, okay, he's on a training camp deal. That's really cool to see. A 3-and-D type of player. When I always play this game of when I hear a player's name, it's like, what jersey pops into mind first? So like, where did I last remember seeing him play? And for me, that was Sacramento. So I was just like, okay, let me think back to that time. And again, 3-and-D guy, a nice, I think, training camp body to have. I know he was playing in the G League a bit last year, but then he had an Achilles injury that completely, derailed the rest of that season. I think that's like in January of this year where he had the Achilles injury. So seems like he's fully healthy now. I remember hearing his name linked with the Bucks prior to this. So seeing that he's a training camp body and that, if he does get waived and he spends at least, I think, was it 60 days with the Herd, then he'll be able to get a bonus. So it seems like, as you mentioned, he might be someone who we see on the Herd coming up this season as well.
He 3-and-D component is obviously what you would salivate over with him. I think he has a 6'9" wingspan, and he was an all rookie selection his rookie year.
Wasn't his rookie year the COVID bubble year?
So I was just going to ask you, do you know who won Rookie of the Year? The year that Terrence Davis was an all rookie and finished 6th in Rookie of the Year voting.
I don't remember who the
You're
COVID
right on the year.
Rookie year. I can't remember who it was that year.
Ja Morant, the Rookie of the Year.
Okay.
Zion Williamson finished 3rd. Guess who finished 2nd? Like this, I don't think you're going to get it, but when I tell you who it was, you're like, oh, yeah, that's right.
Who? I can't even. Who was it?
Kendrick Nunn, 2nd in Rookie of the Year voting that year. Yeah, but the size obviously is what you like when you look at him at 6'4". We mentioned the wingspan and where it's at. He's been an okay 3-point shooter most of his career. Had a couple of really good years early. That all-rookie campaign, he was a 39% shooter. As a career, he's around 36, 37%. Not a high volume attempts guy, at least the last couple years. And I wouldn't presume, even if somehow he carves a spot out on this roster, for him to be a high volume guy with the Bucks. But like, these are the types of moves you love to see being made because of everything we've gone over with the restrictions the Bucks are up against in acquiring players with the cap. You really got to hit it on those margin moves and, finding ways to use your G League to really develop guys and see, okay, can we kind of take the Miami Heat route where you find somebody that has something, really hone that and continue to develop them where we've reached the point that we think, if we need to, these are rotational guys for us that we can throw out there to that larger point of finding that one skill set and really, okay, how do we make you shine with this? I think they've done it with one player specifically, and you can make a case they're starting to do it with a handful of others. That one specifically, clearly AJ Green. But that's exactly what the Heat did with somebody like Duncan Robinson and everybody else. Kendrick Nunn and what they developed with him. Gabe Vincent, when you think about some of those guys along the way. So this is another one of those names that, look, especially with trades, you don't know what's going to happen. Maybe there's a move that the Bucks say, okay, we're willing to do just a salary dump so we can continue to shave some money under that that second apron figure. That opens up playing time for guys like this. So I really like what they're doing with the Exhibit 10s and some of the other signings when you think specifically about Terrence Davis and a guy like Stanley Amude too, that they brought in first signing of the offseason. Like, these are the types of bodies and player skill sets you should look for in those spots and see what you can develop.
And to your point about, like, that's what the G League is here for. Like, that's why we have these two-way contract slots. That's why there are so many different avenues to player development. And it's really cool to see the Bucks leaning into that. When you were talking about it, when you said, like, there's one real success story, and it's like AJ Green, who came to mind for me as well, where it's an undrafted guy. You put him on a two-way spot. You see him with the herd. Get to bring him up to practice every so often, get to see. And the next thing you know, he's signing an actual contract with the big roster, with the Bucks, and he's playing in playoff games, limited minutes for sure. But then you have a summer like this where everything sounds like it's lining up for him to even have a bigger impact this upcoming season. So I love that the way that the NBA has used the G League with the two-way slots, with the every team just about having their own G League affiliate. It just feels so different from the times when it was the D League, and that felt more of like a demotion. Maybe that's why they changed it from D League. I know it's supposed to be development, but it felt kind of like a demotion where it was like people weren't paying attention. But ever since it became like the G League, and it's been like this own thing unto itself, and like a feeder system, a development system, in the truest form, where you can bring guys back and forth between the G League club and the major roster. It's been a win. So Terrence Davis doesn't necessarily fit cleanly into that, given the fact he's like 26, 27 at this point in his career. But again, the skill set you look at and you're like, maybe he can play a role if he is healthy, comes back. We can see it. And again, let's be clear, we're talking about end of roster at the moment type of roles right now. And those are the guys you take a chance on, because end of roster, like, you're trying to develop to see what they can be. So I'm here for it. Like you mentioned, I'm really here for it.
Yeah. I'm curious if he's fully ready to go. Like, that's certainly something, because it was a ruptured Achilles.
Maybe he had the Aaron Rodgers surgery.
Ruptured Achilles that he suffered in January, and now he's good to go and on the Exhibit 10 deal. And just going back to wrap it here, Sacramento, he said he turned down a good deal of money to play overseas because he number one, didn't want to uproot his family. He just had a newborn child, and his goal is to get back to the NBA, and didn't want to go play overseas and then have to figure out your buyout of your contract and how do you make your way back over here, and making sure everybody is seeing things that you've grown at. So this will give him that opportunity. And, you can't help but wonder, a guy, an all rookie selection, the capabilities that he's displayed, how things may have gone differently for him after that trade to Sacramento, if it didn't come at the same time where the Kings also brought in Kevin Huerter and signed Malik Monk. So that basically capped any opportunities in playing time for him. So a lot of intrigue with him. Again, we're not saying, hey, he's going to make the roster and he's going to be an impact player. It's just one to file away and keep an eye on. I would assume he displays enough and ends up with the herd this season. And then it's going to be Terrence Davis watch through most of the season. Is when are the Bucks going to call up Terrence Davis? I think would be the mindset. Any final thoughts on that?
Yeah, just same thing. And if we're looking at if we're getting nerdy here and talking about some of the herd guys that we're kind of interested in, Ryan Rollins is one for me, the two-way guy. After his summer league performance, I'm really going to be paying attention to how he looks with the herd, and if he gets brought up at all throughout the season. So that's a name also that I'm paying attention to.
Well, that'll sounds like a good place to wrap it here. We got one more show coming your way this week. We're going to continue to learn more and more about training camp out in Irvine, California. And we are now, a handful of days away from the first game we will witness with this new group of Milwaukee Bucks. Sunday night, the preseason debut in Detroit for the Bucks and the Pistons. That'll do it for today's show, though. For Camille, I'm Justin. We will talk to you once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.